My name is Rachel Hansen. Um, Now, I had written on LinkedIn earlier today um, that like sometimes you've just got to start, and you start messy, uh, and you go from there. I didn't anticipate how messy the beginning was going to be here this evening when I realized that I had skipped a step in how to go live on my like desktop, which had been the plan. And I was like, I've been really nervous about this, and I just didn't have the brain space to figure out how to do the step that I had missed. So pivoted real quickly to doing this on my phone, which I think is kind of Substack's intent anyway. They want people to do lives on their phone, so I guess this works out great for them. um, I think one thing that is true in live is that sometimes there's awkward pauses as you're kind of getting into your groove. So Um, that is me. I apologize for that kind of, but not really. So as we kind of get rolling here in this introduction to gender and women's studies, one thing that I really wanted to talk about on the outset is honestly, like just some ground rules. Now, I know that I'm going live and that nobody is actually watching this right now. Because Substack gives you these nice little stats at the top of your screen, but Um, so who knows? I may need to repeat those over the course of the next, hour-ish. Um, but if you have any comments, I would love to hear them. Please keep them respectful. Um, I would also really ask that today and also over the next 14 weeks, if you have any questions, I would love them. But I really would encourage you to avoid uh, like the types of questions that I would call like whataboutisms. And what I mean by that are questions where, right, like maybe I am talking about the lived experience of women or what we know about, and specifically, right, like if I'm talking about like my own lived experience as a white woman, or if I'm talking about, with permission, the experience of a friend who is a person of color, or like what we know about the global majority in terms of race, that if I'm talking about that, you're not jumping in and going, hey, but what about these other oppressed people, right? This isn't the Suffering Olympics. So if you have any questions, I would love them. But try to keep your question rooted in what we're talking about like right now, and not about this other thing that you maybe feel like you ought to be bothered by it. There's plenty of space to talk about all of that here, okay? Um, the other thing that I kind of just want to lay out, right, that this can be kind of a synchronous back and forth conversation if you have comments or whatever. Um, but this is a little bit just me talking to a wall a little bit. Um, and I'm a woman who has existed on the internet for her entire life. Uh, if you have comments about how I look or how I sound, just keep them to yourself. Okay. I already know pretty much anything that you might want to say. And frankly, I don't want to hear it. So, anyway, hopefully those all make sense. Now, I'm not going to be talking about. That fell down behind me. Now, I'm not going to be spending every single week talking a lot about myself, but I do want you to kind of know, like, who is this lady that I might be spending some time sitting down with that is maybe has the audacity, right, to teach me or try to teach me um, about gender, about women's studies, about feminism, about all of that. So like I said at the beginning, my name is Rachel Hansen. Um, I think it's fair to say that like a lot of millennials 'cause yes, I'm a person in that generation. I went to college with the promise of from the, like, real adults, right? That it didn't really matter what I went to college for. I just needed a degree, any degree. And I would be able to enjoy employment, that was rewarding and that met my material needs. Um, and I think that we all know how that's panning out. It really didn't. Now, I knew, even as a young adult, that I wanted an advanced degree. And I had spent a lot of time kind of futzing around in community college, uh, both as a high school student who uh, didn't especially like her high school, and with some reflection, that doesn't feel especially fair. But I didn't really like my high school, so I took all college classes my senior year of high school. And my dad, is also a community college professor. And so that meant that when I graduated from high school and I didn't really know what I wanted to go to college for, I have the luxury, right, of exploring without really needing to pay. Now, if you ask me, that's how college should be, but it's not, right, for a lot of people. So by the time I had really exhausted pretty much anything that I could do at community college, and I transferred to university, um, I had to, for a person so young, I had a good amount of life experience underneath my belt. And I decided that the advanced degree that I had mentioned earlier that I wanted to get was a law degree. And that law degree was uh, kind of had the intent of representing women and families who were trying to leave domestic violence situations. And I thought that a bachelor's degree in gender studies would really complement that well. And so that's what I went for. Now, unfortunately for me, after my first semester uh, at university, I did what I should have done at the beginning, and I talked to somebody who actually had, like, a law career. And that's when I learned about a concept called billable hours. And that was, if you are not familiar, I love that for you. Um, but a big part of the reason that lawyers are extremely famous for not having great work-life balance is because all of essentially all of the work that they do for their clients is necessary, right? Like, for the case. Um, but they only are able to bill for about half of that labor. And we might talk about this. I think we'll talk about this in a few weeks about, like, pay equity and things like that. But that didn't seem especially fair to me. And as somebody who knew that she wanted a family, and as a young adult, I was not a very good test taker. I decided to ditch that idea, but I'd still been in college for a little bit too long, and so I finished the degree in gender studies. And boy, was it wild for me to realize that the degree that I was pursuing, and that I had pursued about as hopefully as anybody in their early 20s could pursue anything, um, was very suddenly the shorthand in conservative news media for everything that was wrong with the liberal arts in American post-secondary education. Uh, and so that really then launched, right, like, kind of a young adulthood of people asking me what my degree was, because that's what you do with young adults. And then the real grown-ups going, "Oh, cool. So what do you do with that?" Right now, meanwhile, right, like, all of this is happening. I'm not just in college, right? Like, my spouse and I got married to each other, and he is just an absolute champion. Um, right. So we got married, we finished our bachelor's degree, we started having children. Um, And pretty soon, like, yes, I had finished my bachelor's degree, but, um, I was a new parent, really working, trying to work in a post-recession America where that promise of, like, just get a degree, any degree, was absolutely not materializing. Um, Now fast forward, oh golly, how long was it? About 6 years between, when I finished my bachelor's degree and when I really started feeling the itch, right, to go back to school. I was working in a job that the job itself was fine. My boss was not fine. And it became very clear to me that if I wanted to try to advance out of where I was, um, or heck, even get a foot in the door anywhere, that I was going to need a graduate level degree because I was working in uh, public post secondary education at the time. Actually, I still am, just in a different role. My boss is great. So that's really nice. But um, I kind of looked around. Um, my husband had finished his master's degree in public administration. And the university that I was working for uh, had a few things that were really attractive to me. Uh, now, I was a member of a labor union, so I didn't have to pay for my degree again, which, again, awesome. Probably how it should be for everybody. I was also an alumni of that institution, which also meant that when I was applying for graduate school, I didn't have to pay an application fee and I didn't have to pay to send my transcripts because they already had them. And so I applied to start a master's degree in public and nonprofit administration, which I finished in the spring of 2020, right as COVID was getting into full swing. Um, Now, as a student, right, like I'm not a stranger to having real lifey things happen while you are in school. Um, when I was working on my bachelor's degree, I was working a full-time job because I had to get by. Then working on my master's degree, I of course was working full-time. Um, my spouse and I had 2 kids when I started the master's degree, finished with 3. Um, and so that was a real adventure. Um, Now, meanwhile, right, I'm working for one of the most diverse universities in the state of Minnesota, which is something that I'm extremely proud of. But I think if you ask anybody who works in front-facing student affairs, like the last 5 years have been really challenging, um, for a variety of reasons, right? Like, it's been challenging because of COVID, um, and regardless of the party that you are in, public higher education has been kind of a tumultuous place to be, right? There have been campaign promises of student loan forgiveness and um, then campaign conversations about how, uh, right, like public higher education is terrible and no one should pursue it and it's not worth the investment, right? Like all this wild swinging. It's a rough place to be. And so finally, we've arrived a little bit closer to where we are right now in space time. Um, and that is, I went, okay, uh, this is nuts. And also, I keep thinking about this graduate certificate within the system that I work for in gender and women's studies. Uh, I keep thinking about it. I can't stop thinking about it. I better just take the classes and get the certificate. And so that's what I did. Just got my water here. It's good stuff. And one of the things that really attracted me to this particular graduate certificate was a really strong focus on transnational feminism. Uh, More specific, in addition, I will say intersectional feminism and really like pedagogical teaching practices. Because if you have been in school, I mean, right, actually, honestly, really any school, right? Um, you know that there are folks there who come across like they're just there for the paycheck and they don't care about the craft of teaching. Um, and I am extremely interested in teaching. I love doing it. And I love the conversation that comes as kind of part of all of that. And so, kind of the feminist pedagogy and building democratic classrooms is something that I'm extremely interested in. Um, that was a lot. That was me kind of just talking about myself now for like 17 minutes. So, um, kind of into this class now. Um, my experiences in learning about feminism, learning about gender studies, have ultimately made me a better partner, a better parent, a better community member, kind of all of those things. And I hope that if you're following along again over the next 14 weeks, that that's something that comes along to you as well. Now, before I start talking about kind of that first um, like piece of academic content that was in this week's newsletter, one thing that I do want to address really quickly is the 14-week length. If you are a person who has been in like post-secondary education, and I would say very notably not accelerated post-secondary education, you know that a standard semester is typically about 16 weeks. The reason that this course is 14 weeks is because me and my family are going on vacation in December. And frankly, I just want to go on vacation and not really worry about this. So that's why the 14 weeks. Now, the very first kind of piece of content that I wrote about in this week's newsletter was not something that you would read. It was a TED Talk. It's a TED Talk called We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Adichie. Now, she is a Nigerian writer, book reviewer, and literary critic. Now, we're, of course, talking about We Should All Be Feminists because this is the first week. She does another TED Talk that honestly I think is just fabulous. So if you have the time to watch The Danger of a Single Story, please do check it out. It's absolutely time well spent. Now, I, of course, will not claim to be any kind of an expert in Nigerian culture, right? Like, I really am as white as they come. And I've never been to the continent. So I'm really am relying on Adichie's words here. When she refers to Nigerian culture as extremely patriarchal, and I think that regardless of the culture that we grow up in, all of us kind of know a little bit something about that, right? And so when she was coming into her identity as a feminist, as a young adult, she wound up adding in all of these qualifiers, right? So that people wouldn't go, well, you're not a feminist, you're not angry. And she eventually started calling herself, and I quote, a happy African feminist who does not hate men and who likes lip gloss and who wears high heels for herself but not for men. Now, I loved her description of that struggle because in my own young adult life, coming into my own feminist identity, it was a significant time historically, I think is what I will say. Now my spouse and I uh, got married to each other in December of 2010. In the United States, that was before marriage equality was a thing, if you will. So, um, and that semester leading up to our wedding, because we got married at the end of the term, one of the classes that I was enrolled in was gender, race, and popular culture. Now, in the United States, you absolutely cannot talk about popular culture without talking about marriage because it's everywhere, right? Um, and I had my professor for that class would very regularly, um, when she learned that I was going to change my last name to my spouse's last name, she would go, "Oh, I wish these young girls would realize what a terrible mistake they were making." I am very stubborn. Um, but I figured that if I was going to do something as unfeminist as changing my last name from Kelson to Hanson, the audacity, um, I better at least have the decency to cut my hair very short. And so that's what I did. Um, but what I and Adichie both really came to realize um, is that feminism is not about a look, right? It's not about what you look like or necessarily even a little bit what you choose to do. And we'll be talking about that over the next few weeks here, but not necessarily even what you choose to do. Um, but the idea that feminism really champions is equal opportunity for equal effort. Now, Adichie illustrates this really well, again, in her talk when she talks about um, not being selected as a classroom monitor because um, because only boys in her childhood class were classroom monitors, um, despite her meeting all the criteria to be the classroom monitor. And one thing that I had asked about as I was writing this week were kind of just asking you to think about, like, what are some moments in your life that really helped you realize that your effort didn't afford the same opportunities as somebody else? Um, Now, when I think about my life, um, this is a little bit weird, maybe like a little diversion from just talk about feminism, but they really are all connected. I really think about um, classism, actually, rather than feminism. Um, because in a lot of ways, uh, I live in a culture where I am, in fact, rather privileged, right? Um, and I believe, but I'm double checking, that we're talking about privilege next week. Oh no, we're talking about privilege in 2 weeks. um, but within classism, um, I do have peers, right, who have on the surface done the same thing as me, right? Same degree, maybe have also been um, with a long term partner for a significant amount of time. Um, and that have things that I don't have. And that's a result really of um, being able to be a little bit more free to make choices as a result of economic privilege. And that economic privilege goes hand in hand with like gender and racial identity and how you kind of measure up to the social and unspoken rules, right, of gender. Uh, but as you're kind of thinking about those things in your own life, um, it's not that big of a step forward, right? To realize that it's those types of moments, like those moments in your own life, that really do make feminism necessary for all of us. Uh, Now, the next thing that we're talking about here this week is actually a chapter from Bell Hooks' book, Feminism is for Everybody, Passionate Politics. Now, in the newsletter for this week, all of the things that I'm mentioning are linked, and they are freely accessible to you. Um, Now, for Feminism is for Everybody, I did read it. I also am a person who likes a good audiobook. This is also available as an audiobook if you want to listen to it. Now, like Adichie, Hooks does a really good job of driving home the notion, like the social notion that feminists are people who are really angry for no good reason. Right? You really will see, right, kind of in your lived experience, I imagine. Like, I've seen it, so I suspect that you have too. That people really do equate, right, feminism and anger. And certainly, like, that's one of the feelings that can be associated with it, because feminism is about trying to bring justice to an unjust world. And it's fair to be kind of pissed off at injustice, right? But you're not just walking around being angry for no reason at all. And Hooks talks about this in her book. She talks about how, like, people that she's just kind of chatting with, right, like out there in the world, are very quick to tell her that she is different, that she's not like real feminists who are angry and who hate men. And she, and I hope all of us now, like in this conversation, will really realize that all of us are, if we draw closer to feminism, we will realize that it's not anything close to what we had imagined that it was. And that feminism really is about kind of having a robust conversation around what it means to have equal opportunity for equal effort, regardless of really like how we're showing up in the world. Now, excuse me. Now, another thing that Hooks talks about, excuse me, just to think about going live on your phone is that, like, sometimes you have to go, actually, no, I don't want that spam call. Anyway, one of the things that Hooks really talks about in chapter 1 and in the introduction of her book, is how feminism is a movement to end sexism, and that very specifically, sexism doesn't come naturally to people because sexism requires violent domination over others. And if you're a decent person, that's not something that you are very interested in. Now, I would go a little bit further than what Hooks is talking about, to say that really the problem in the society that we live in is patriarchy and how patriarchy currently exists within our social framework. Because it's very much a zero-sum game. And I don't know that I necessarily want to call it a game. It's not very fun. But for lack of a better word coming to me in the moment, that's kind of where we're going to be at. And that members of society, which is all of us, at a very basic level, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth as we go along through the weeks, we are either victims of domination or we are perpetuating the domination, right? Um, but more than that, rather than viewing dominating as an individual choice, although it absolutely can sometimes be an individual choice, um, I would suggest that we generally accept Jennifer Einspar's philosophy, um, that domination is a structural concept that keeps people of all gender identities in their place where within that social hierarchy, that where the social hierarchy really benefits a relative few. Um, and now again, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a few weeks, but right, but those relative few um, within kind of this system of late stage capitalism that we are living in are generally ultra wealthy white men. Um, I'm mixing it up to some honey chai turmeric tea. It's really good. um, but right, like we're really living in, right, like I think that it would be very fair and accurate to say that we're living in a world where um, there is this social hierarchy and that feminism is one of the tools that we have available to us um, to really kind of dismantle that framework and also to build um, really a new economic system that benefits the many and not the few. And I wasn't actually intending to turn that ending into a Star Trek quote, but if you look, oh, other hand, if you look up there behind me, you'll see I'm a fan. We're a fan here in this family. It's really good. Um, I think the other thing that I didn't write about in this week's module, but that I do really want to talk about um, is something that's referred to generally when we talk about feminism. Um, and I'm mostly just talking about it, right? Like I'm treating this as an introduction class, so you might um, I'm treating you hopefully not um, in an infantilizing way, but like you have maybe not encountered these concepts before. Um, and that is to talk about the waves of feminism and kind of like the history of it. Um, now, usually, like in academia, when we are talking about um, waves of feminism, we're usually talking about first, second, and third waves of feminism. Now, within the United States and also to an extent Europe as well, um, when scholars are talking about first wave feminism, they're talking about women's effort to, excuse me, to gain the right to vote. Now, that, of course, was extremely problematic. Now, in the United States, which of course is where I live, and so I'm more familiar with the history, um, the women's suffrage movement that really characterized first wave feminism was also deeply racist and classist. Um, so, did it get some women the right to vote? Like, yeah, absolutely, and that should be applauded, but was not without its issues. Now, second wave feminism is maybe mostly what um, we think of in the United States when we're thinking about feminism. Um, and that is really like the feminism of like the 60s and the 70s. Still very white, right? Um, where white women were really seeking to build a social structure where they were empowered to work outside their homes and to be equal partners. Now that didn't. I mean, if obviously it panned out okay, but the movement didn't really address the racism that was inherent in the like within the system. And really, it was kind of ignored that women of color had been working outside of their homes uh, basically forever, right? Um, that there was maybe not a tremendous amount of work done to uh, recognize just how unequal the playing field was, right? Like the plight of white women, which was valid, was treated as the plight of all women, which was not accurate, right? Um, and then we have what is really referred to as third wave, fe- excuse me, third wave feminism. Really a feminism of the 90s and the early 2000s. Um, although there are some quibbles, right, about the ending of third wave feminism. Um, and that's where we really start seeing uh, women living like, lives a lot more fully than their mothers and their grandmothers. And that movement is really characterized a lot by access to reproductive health and birth control, um, and to also have things like equal pay for equal work codified within the law. Um, whether that actually panned out or not, um, not really, but right, the attempt was made. Um, and then things that had in fact been legal in the 60s and the 70s, like discrimination um, based on like family status, notably pregnancy status, things like that, were also made illegal during this time. Um, I would argue that we are now living in, uh, if you want to think of feminism as a movement of waves, that we are living in fourth wave feminism. Um, and I think that fourth wave feminism really did kind of, it's ushered in by the idea that, actually less of an idea, more like the Dobbs case in the U.S. Supreme Court that took away the right to an abortion for women in the United States. Um, right, and that is not that you necessarily want to always tie women's rights to our reproductive abilities, because of course not all women reproduce. Um, right, like you don't have to. Uh, your gender identity isn't tied to your reproductive ability, but um, for the people who are growing humans inside our bodies, right, it's huge. um, Pregnancy can be massively disruptive. I would So I think that that is really what's ushering in this fourth wave of feminism. Um, what I am really hoping that we see, uh, kind of as the goals of the movement, and I think it would be fair to say that we're all kind of part of the movement, because it's not a movement necessarily where you're out there in the streets and you've got your signs and you've got all the things. Um, it has a lot more to do with just how you live your regular everyday life. Um, Now, segueing off again for a second here, um, I have never read the Lord of the Rings books, although it is on my docket for the next uh, year to year and a half. But I have seen all the films. And one thing that I think about pretty often um, within those films um, is a quote that's attributed to Gandalf. Now, don't come at me. I don't know if it's in the books, but it is in the movies. And Gandalf talks about um, how goodness is really, um, people think of goodness as like these big grand events. And he finds that it really is in these very small and simple acts of goodness that really build bonds between each other. And I think that that's the right way to think about feminism, right? It's not the stuff that is a big deal. Um, it's the stuff that is maybe feels small or that isn't really flashy. Um, and so kind of with that in mind, what I really hope that fourth wave feminism is going to bring for us. And I think that this course is going to be part of that conversation, at least a little bit. I hope so. Uh, is that we're going to see a lot more like generational healing, um, and really extremely purposeful self examination, and not from a place of ego, but really from a place of curiosity, and wanting to build those bridges between each other. Um, oh, economically, and from a policy perspective, what I really hope this wave of feminism is going to bring is something that is actually not a new idea. And again, I know I've said this a bunch over the last um, 40 minutes, but and we will talk about this in a few weeks. But kind of they're in the thick of second wave feminism. The United Nations decided to do the Decade for Women, and that was 1975 to 1985. And one of the things that they came through with in their treatise, that was presented to the UN, and then, uh, yeah, we're not really living it, was really a desire and a commitment to um, build a new kind of an economy that isn't rooted in capitalism, that is maybe rooted a little bit more in socialism. I know, ooh, but um, but an economy globally, right? That values caretaking and that values like wise use of natural resources. Right, a type of system that is just restorative overall. Um, and so, yeah, as a policy decision, that's something that I would really love to see as a result of whatever this fourth wave of feminism winds up looking like. Um, so, well, in 20 years, when somebody's talking about feminism, that maybe these are some of the goals that we will achieve. Um, Now, I think that that really is it for me. So, thank you, friend, for staying for the whole time here. Um, I'm glad that you stopped in. Now, over the next few weeks, I think this is going to be um, up on Substack. Is going to be available to everyone. Um, but the following weeks are going to be behind a paywall. So if you want to continue watching these lectures and having maybe a more interactive conversation, um, you can subscribe. Um, there's a paid subscription that is available. And I think that that really is it. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I know that maybe talking about feminism on a Tuesday night is not exactly a dream come true, but I'm really glad that you joined me here. Um, and I hope to see you back next Tuesday at 7:40 p.m. Central Standard Time.